We are talking about Joshua, and we've been in this message for the last number of weeks, and we're going to go all the way through the end of the book. We've got about another month and a half left, but it's been so much fun to look at the life of Joshua and as he led Israel. And so we talk about things like being strong and being courageous. We talk about things like stepping out in faith and trusting in God. And so we've seen how God comes through for his people time and time again, and maybe you've seen that as well in your own life. But I want to ask you a question today, which is, when was a time that you got yourself into trouble? Exactly, which time? When's the time that you look back at your life and you're like, I can't believe I did that? And you might look back now and you think it's funny, right? Like when I think, and my wife and kids bring this up many times, of when I was younger and I tested the hypothesis, will your tongue stick to metal when it's cold outside and freezing, right? Fun fact, it does. And the place you should not test it is on a walkway of a bridge. But if you pull hard enough, it does come off. And then you bleed for hours. So I look back and I'm like, okay, that was a dumb decision. And that was me. I was with a friend. He was like, you should not do this. I was like, yeah, should I? So, we look back at things like that. And then we have other times where we look back and it still hurts, the decisions that we made. Because maybe we didn't just affect ourselves. Maybe we affected others. Maybe we cut ourselves or others incredibly deeply with what we did or what we said. And maybe you look back, and maybe it's something that a purchase that you regret. Maybe it's words that you said. Maybe it's a decision that you made, or maybe it's one that you thought you should have made, but you didn't make at the time, and now that you regret doing it. And life is hard without us making more trouble for ourselves. Yet sometimes we do it anyway. And especially when we're going after what God has called us to and the promises that he has for your life, it can feel even more difficult sometimes, because when God calls us, because you are a child of God, and so when you accept him, Christ as your Lord and Savior, you bow the knee and you're baptized, you're like, I'm going to follow Christ with everything that I have. I'm going to come to church. I'm going to sing songs. I'm going to do all this stuff. I'm going to read my Bible. And as you're walking and as you're stepping into the call that God has for your life, it's hard enough. It requires being strong. It requires being courageous. It requires having smarts about what to do in a situation and common sense. And should I do this? Should I do that? It requires having wisdom. It requires being strong, just because sometimes people are going to be against you and question your decisions. It's going to feel like you have barriers in your life. And when you follow Jesus, when you follow God, right, you are not just going through like now all of a sudden you have spiritual warfare as well, because you have the gates of hell coming against you. And so it can be difficult to continue to feel like, hey, am I walking well? And it can be hard because sometimes we do things that just bring trouble on ourselves. And so we've been looking at Joshua, where people are doing just that, where Joshua's leading people and they're venturing into the unknown. They're going into the promise that God has had them and told them about. And he said, you know what, I'm going to give this land to you, and it's going to be great. It's going to be a land flowing with milk and honey, and you're not going to have to be nomads and wanderers anymore in the desert. You're not going to be slaves in Egypt. Instead, I'm going to have everything for you, right? When they come into the land, that's when the manna stops, and that's when he stops providing for them, because he's like, I brought you into this land. You don't need to have any food anymore, where you're like, I don't even know what this is. Literally, what is it? Manna, right? Instead, he's like, there's so much good food that I've got in store for you, and you're going to have so much, but they have to take it. And so as we've seen, his people, led by Joshua, are strong and courageous, and they've had to strategize, and Joshua has been smart in the whole transition from Moses to him and how he's been following God and leading the people. But what we're going to see today from Joshua is that we can be smart and strong and courageous but still get ourselves into trouble. And so the title of my talk today is How to Get Yourself into Trouble Despite Being Smart, Strong, and Courageous. And so what we'll find is not only how we get ourselves in it, but how to keep ourselves out of it so we can find more peace, clarity, focus, strength, stamina, wisdom in our lives. And so to recap real quick where we are in Joshua, the Israelites have been given the promise from God, right? They were on the east side of the Jordan. He gave them promise. They renewed that promise. And then they saw the miracle of God as they crossed the Jordan River. And then they seen the victory of God as they took the city of Jericho by God's undeniable strength. The only thing about that was that God said, the most valuable items in the city are to be devoted to me. They're to go into my treasury, my storehouse. We talked about that last week, and we're like, how come that wasn't the case for everything? Well, because it was the first city they took. And oftentimes in Scripture, God says, bring me the first fruits, or the tithe, or the tenth. And that is to be devoted to God, right? And so when they took Jericho, they were to bring the gold and the silver and the most valuable items into the treasury of God. Well, everybody did that except for one guy. And as a result, then all of Israel had to suffer. And so they go on to the next city, which is Ai, and they should easily take that one. But they suffer a ridiculously humiliating defeat. And we talked about that last week. And so if you're in a place where you're like, God, I'm following you, but how come everything seems to be falling apart in my life right now? How come this isn't working for me? I'm doing what I can. Like, that's Joshua, right? He offers that prayer. He's like, because from Joshua's perspective, he didn't know what was going on. And so he's just thinking, like, God, did you just bring us all the way here to, like, humiliate us? Because you should be coming through, but you're not. And then God's like, listen here. You guys have sin in your life. You didn't deal with it. And so Joshua has to take a leadership position, and then he deals with Achan and his family and the sin for what they had all stolen in life. And so they've been renewed. The Israelites have been renewed now, and so things are going great for Israel. Their enemies they're frightened, and these kings that are currently in the land come together to take on Joshua and the Israelites. So we're going to be in Joshua 9:1 today. And so here we go. It says, now when all the kings west of the Jordan, so remember we started east of the Jordan, there was a miracle of the Jordan, dried up, all of Israel crosses on dry ground, and they are now on the west side of the Jordan, just on the west side of the Jordan. The kings in the hill country, in the western foothills, and along the entire coast of the Mediterranean Sea as far as Lebanon, it's in the north, the kings of the Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, they came together to wage war against Joshua and Israel. So they're not just sneaking in anymore. Everybody knows that they're there. And as Rahab told them, everybody is pretty freaked out because they've heard of what God has done. And so I know all of you know where the Hittites, the Amorites, and the Canaanites are, but just for those few that don't. So here's a map. Here's Dead Sea. Here's the Sea of Galilee. Jesus is going to do a lot over there later when he gets on the scene. But for right now, they started here. They went over the Jordan River. They made camp at Gilgal Hill. We're going to hear about that in a little bit. And then they took Jericho. Ai is over here. And so up here is where you've got the Hittites, right? Talked about Lebanon. So Hittites are up there. We've got the Canaanites over here. The Amorites are in this country. Hivites, we're going to talk about them. They're going to be a big player today. And then the Jebusites as well. And then in the hill country, so the mountains kind of run like this. And that's where the Perizzites are. So they are around there. And so this is kind of where we see like all of these nations are coming together to fight the Israelite army that is camped right here. All right, again, they've taken Jericho and they've taken Ai. And so we're going to be dealing a lot with the Hivites because, again, everybody's kind of afraid. And if you're a Hivite, who's next on Israel's radar? You, with a God who stopped up the Red Sea and who took care of already the kingdom here and the kingdom up here. Two victories that Israel really shouldn't have won, but they have a pretty great God, and the people in the land know about it. So we go on. However, when the people of Gibeon, which saw that city, heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and Ai, they resorted to a ruse. Your translations also might say cunning. It might say deception. Yeah, that's a good one as well. It says they went as a delegation whose donkeys were loaded with worn-out sacks and old wineskins, cracked and mended. They put worn and patched sandals on their feet and wore old clothes. All the bread of their food supply was dry and moldy, Then they went to Joshua in the camp at Gilgal and said to him and the Israelites, "We have come from a distant country. Make a treaty with us." So, once again, if we go to the map, you have Jericho and Gilgal about here, and Gibeon is about here. It's about 20 to 26 miles. So, today we can drive that in half an hour or less. But if you're on foot and you're having to walk it, right, it takes some time. And so Gibeon is trying to head this off before Israel comes and takes this land, because again, they're next. They kind of hold the key to everything from here, right? If you own this part, if you're Israel, you can come in, you can go south, and then you can go north, and you can take the whole thing. And so they're like, we need to come up with a strategy, and we need to come up with it quick in order that we might not be destroyed. The Israelites said to the Hivites, "But perhaps you live near us, so how can we make a treaty with you?" So see, Israel has the right perspective. They know what God has said. They want to follow his ways. They've already seen what happens when they disobey him, as when Achan stole and kept the things devoted to God, how that affected everyone and how they suffered defeat. And so when Israel meets these people, the Hivites, their senses are heightened. And you know this because you've encountered experiences where your senses are heightened and your defenses go up, and you're trying to figure out, am I in a good situation here? Can I trust these people? Is this right? Does this feel okay? And if you don't know what I'm talking about, think about the last time you went to buy a car. Because you're trying to process a lot of information pretty fast, and you're trying to figure out if you can trust the person you're talking to, and if you're getting a good deal, and if you're buying a used car, like, is it reliable? Is it going to last longer than just getting off the lot? And so your senses go up. You're being more perceptive. You're trying to ask all the questions. You're trying to process a lot of information all at once. And these Hivites are incredibly cunning. And we sometimes don't appreciate this because here we're not used to negotiating, right? It feels kind of weird sometimes, especially the first time maybe if you have worked in sales. It's awkward at first, right, to ask for the sale and to do negotiating. But in other parts of the world, that's not the case, and you're always trying to angle and get the best deal. One of my clients recently went to Peru with their husband, and they did Machu Picchu, all that stuff, and they went with some friends. And her husband loves art. He's an artist, does it as his job, and so he loves art, and so he was in Peru, and she's like, we were going to he's seeing all these shops and the vendors along the sides of the streets which are selling stuff, and she's like, and my husband was just going up, and he was like, oh, I like that, and he would just buy them. And she's like, he wasn't negotiating for the price. Like, he was just like, oh, I'll take whatever you say, right? She's like, and then we would talk to our friends who bought the exact same thing at half the price. But he just didn't want to negotiate. Like, he just didn't like it. Okay, right? And in other parts of the world, especially in the Middle East, that's a very common thing, is there is an aspect to just negotiating for pretty much everything. And so it's not, we have to understand that it's also in the context and the culture of what they're doing, but they're also very skilled at it. They're very good at it. And they said, we are your servants, they said to Joshua. So they're talking to Joshua now, the leader. We are your servants, they said to Joshua. But Joshua asked, who are you and where do you come from? So Joshua is strong, he's courageous, but he's also smart. He asked the right question. And no doubt, he will deal with them as God commanded. He will kill them if they are from the area. And so he asked them the right question, but he's also looking at it only from a very physical point of view. See, the problem is right now he's operating only in the physical while trying to walk in the spiritual calling of God. And so they answered, "Your servants have come from a very distant country because of the fame of the Lord your God. We have heard reports of him, all that he did in Egypt to the south, all that he did to the two kings of Amorites east of the Jordan, Sihon, king of Heshbon." So now we're moving up. And then Og, king of Bashan, even farther north, right? The inference is that they're from a way far northern country, probably along the Fertile Crescent. And they know that Israel could take all that land, so they want to make a treaty quick. "And our elders and all those living in our country said to us, 'Take provisions for your journey, go and meet them and say to them, we are your servants, make a treaty with us. This bread of ours was warm when we packed it at home on the day we left to come to you, but now see how dry and moldy it is, and these wineskins that we filled were new, but see how cracked they are, and our clothes and sandals are worn out by the very long journey.' What they say makes complete sense. And what they do makes complete sense. What they look like makes complete sense. Everything seems to fit. And if you and I were with Joshua and Israel, we'd probably be like, yep, checks out. Makes sense. But then we get to this really vital verse. The Israelites sampled their provisions, but did not inquire of the Lord. They were so sure that they were right, and that anybody with common sense would agree, that they didn't bring it to God. And this is where you and I fall into the same trap. Because it's very easy for me to think, oh, I know what to do, I know what to say, that I don't bring decisions to God. We will for the big things. We will for, should I move? We will for our kids as they get ready to go to college. We will for a career change. Like the big things, we're like, yeah, God should be involved in this situation. But how many times in life do we think, I got this? It's common sense. And so it's very easy for me to think I know what to do, I know what to say, that I don't bring decisions to God. And it's not because I'm afraid of what he'll say. It's that I know what I'm doing. Just like when your kids were 3 years old, they knew what they were doing. But we are both physical and spiritual, and so it's easy for me to be completely confident in the physical from my perspective and lack the spiritual. Joshua saw the opportunity physically to make an alliance. Because again, remember, he knows all the kings in that area are now against him. So that's probably weighing on him. And people are probably coming to him saying, like, did you hear so-and-so join the fight against us? And he's looking at the resources that he has compared with the resources of everyone else. And even though he knows God is for him, there's still an aspect of that physical part which is probably causing him a little bit of stress and a little bit of worry. And so you have these people that are come to him and they're like, hey, we want to make a treaty with you. That's like an instant, But he didn't go to God on whether he should. Because all he did was see the opportunity. And everything seemed to check out from a common sense point of view. You know, when I'm at my other job training people, doing nutrition, I get to know people pretty well, and they tell me their stories, and so I get to know how things are going in their relationships and what they're up to in life, their health situation, their family situation, even their finances they share. And so it's interesting how many times people tell me, hey, like we're really struggling. Like I counted this morning, it was like 3 times even in the last month and a half where someone that I know has been struggling financially, but then they've also come up to me and been like, hey, guess what? I got a brand new car because I got decent payments on it. Their other car was working fine. And it's not that they shouldn't get, or people shouldn't get a new car, but was this the healthiest financial decision for you at this time? Right? Because they saw the opportunity to buy something at a very good price, but they didn't think, well, do I need to? Like, is this a good decision right now? Or maybe you date someone and you know that they're wrong for you, but you simply want to be in a relationship with somebody. So it's not, should I date this person? Do they have my values? But rather, there's an opportunity to be with someone and to not just be alone. And so Joshua sees an opportunity, and in the midst of having to fight battles and to strategize and keep morale up, he can make an easy treaty with these people. It's common sense, and he did what most of us would do. He focused on the opportunity. He researched the opportunity. Joshua may have even thanked God for the opportunity, but he did not inquire of God regarding the opportunity. And when we talk about God and his characteristics, we say things like he is all-powerful. Another way of saying that is he's omnipotent. He's all-powerful. But we also say that he's all-knowing. We call that omniscience. And if you want to know how to spell it out, it's omniscience. And so although these people can say that they are from a distant land and that they look the part and they talk the part and they sound the part and there's like, hey, my sandals are falling apart as we speak, they can fool Joshua and Israel, but God, being omniscient and all-knowing, knows who they are, and he knows they are deceiving his people. But the Israelites did not inquire of the Lord. And sometimes people might push back and be like, well, why didn't God just tell them? Well, because he won't barge into our lives. I remember times in my life when, as a kid, I would do something stupid. I told you about the tongue incident. But there are many other times where, as a boy, I would do things like jump from our tree branch onto the ground and try and do a somersault out of it. There are many things involving cement steps in our house, and so I cut my head open numerous times. But I remember when I would do dumb things, my mom would watch, and then she would say, "Hurts, doesn't it? Bet you won't do that again." And my mom loves me, but she knew if I were to grow and learn, she had to let me learn. If I had said to her, "Mom, do you think I should try this?" She'd probably be like, "No." But guess what? I didn't ask my mom. I didn't ask her what she thought because I knew best. And even if I did ask her, there's a chance that I wouldn't have listened because I trusted myself. And so we can understand where Joshua is coming from, but we can also understand why we oftentimes find ourselves in that same place. Then Joshua made a treaty of peace with them to let them live. And the leaders of the assembly ratified it by oath. And they probably made the treaty in the name of God. But they're allowed to live now. Because God had told the Israelites, everybody that lives in the land needs to be destroyed. Remember, these aren't just happy people that are living in the land. These are wicked people. These are sinful people. In fact, earlier, God will tell Israel that he's going to bring them into the land as a judgment because of the great wickedness of those that are currently living in the land. Because it's been growing and growing and growing and growing. The land has become polluted and corrupt with sin. And so Israel was to come in and act as God's judgment on these people. So it was both a promise for his people, but judgment on them. Verse 16, 3 days after they made the treaty with the Gibeonites, the Israelites heard that they were neighbors living near them. Surprise. So the Israelites set out, and on the third day came to their cities, Gibeon, Kephirah, Beeroth, and Kiriath-Jearim. But the Israelites did not attack them because the leaders of the assembly had sworn an oath to them by the Lord, the God of Israel. The whole assembly grumbled against the leaders, so Israel's upset with their leaders. But all the leaders answered, "We have given them our oath by the Lord, the God of Israel. We cannot touch them now. This is what we will do to them. We will let them live so that God's wrath will not fall on us for breaking the oath we swore to them. They continued, let them live, but let them be woodcutters and water carriers in the service of the whole assembly. In other words, let them serve us. So the leader's promise to them was kept. See, for Israel, integrity mattered. They could not break an oath, even if the other party lied, because they had invoked the name of God, and they would not use his name in vain. So they were going to uphold the oath that they made in his name. Then Joshua summoned the Gibeonites and said, why did you deceive us by saying we live a long way from you when actually you live near us? You are now under a curse. You will never be released from service as woodcutters and water carriers for the house of my God. They answered Joshua, your servants were clearly told how the Lord your God had commanded his servant Moses to give you the whole land, to wipe out all its inhabitants from before you. They're like, yeah, we know what was going to happen to us. So we feared for our lives because of you, and this is why we did this. We are now in your hands. Do to us whatever seems good and right to you. They had the right idea. Better to be under the hand of God's people than to be annihilated by them. So Joshua saved them from the Israelites, and they did not kill them. That day he made the Gibeonites woodcutters and water carriers for the assembly to provide for the needs of the altar of the Lord at the place the Lord would choose, and that is what they are to this day. And so Israel makes the best of a bad situation, and we can find ourselves doing the same thing when you and I don't inquire of God and we get ourselves into trouble. It's still important that we act with integrity. Israel messed up. They didn't inquire of God, and as a result, they ended up being in disobedience to God's command to remove everybody from the land. Again, they were evil people, and they get a get-out-of-jail-free card because they're cunning and they're deceptive. But even in the face of wicked, cunning people, Israel still operates with integrity. And you and I are to do the same, right? Jesus says, pray for your enemies and those who persecute you. So when we do find ourselves in trouble, we're still to come back to walking with integrity, not stooping down to other people's level, so that we can reflect our great God. And so here's the takeaway today. It's really just one simple question. Do I inquire of the Lord enough? Like, do I actually inquire of the Lord enough? Do we tend to think, should I take that job which offers more money and more benefits? Or do I stay where I'm at? Is that all we think? Or do we bring it to God and say, God, what should I do? Is it that we start thinking about our plans for after high school and think, where should I go to college? Should I go to college, or should I do this trade? Or do we bring it to God and say, God, what should I do? Because sometimes he will give you a clear answer. Do we just pray, or do we just think, I should say, about the opportunities that we have? Or do we bring it to God for some all-knowing direction? And so we need to bring decisions and opportunities to God more often than we usually do. And some people might be like, well, I don't want to be overly spiritual and be someone who sees a demon hiding behind every corner, thinking God is maybe at work where perhaps he isn't. But the danger for most of us isn't seeking God too much, it's that we seek him too little. And we don't allow him to be a part of our lives probably as much as we should. If anything, this passage today teaches his people, Israel then, you and I today, that we can't seek him enough. For in what seems like a common sense decision where they did their due diligence, they still fell short, simply because they did not inquire of the Lord. And so what decisions are you currently making or thinking about or wrestling with that you're relying 100% on common sense, trying to figure it out? Where are you focused on an opportunity? And maybe you're researching the opportunity. Maybe even you thanked God for the opportunity. But have you inquired to God about the opportunity? And so we get the privilege to follow a God who calls us to do great things. He's created you to do good, great works which he's prepared beforehand for you to do. He's put his favor upon you. He wants to bless you because you're his kids. He wants you to have a great marriage, to have good relationships with your children. I think he wants you to be great parents and great grandparents. And I think students, he wants to do things through you and for you that you can't even comprehend yet. And if you're retired, I think God wants to do great things through you and for you that you can't even comprehend yet. Because that's who he is. And he will call you to be like Joshua and to go into the promise that he has for you, giving you that land one step at a time. But it takes strength and it takes courage. Just like he called Peter to get out of a boat and to step onto waves, because our God can make the impossible possible. But if I'm going to do it and follow God to the best of my ability, then I need spiritual insight, and you need spiritual insight for some spiritual direction. Because my tendency is to focus on my smarts, my strength, my courage, my faith. But I need to bring my spiritual God into it for some spiritual direction. And so let us seek him with what we're currently thinking about and what we're facing, and inquiring of him. Just like Joshua learned that he had to do. Because when you have the strength and the courage and the smarts, and also then when you're inquiring of the Lord, there really is nobody that can stop you. And you will walk into his blessings and his calling and the promises that he has for you. Because then we're just operating completely in alignment with him, which is a really good place to be. The problem is staying there, reminding ourselves to do that. Because it's so easy to get off track, and you can do it without even thinking. But that's why we have things like the story of Joshua, to remind us to get back to. That's why we have the story of Jesus and Peter, where Jesus is like, okay, you're thinking, eyes on me, okay, let's come back. To remind us, not just to rely on ourselves, but we have a God who wants us to inquire from him, which is a pretty good thing to have. Let's pray. God, we thank you so much for how much you love us and how much you care about us. And so today we realize that sometimes we don't inquire of you enough. We should do it a lot more. And so for those that are wrestling with a decision and they prayed about things and they thanked you for things, but we haven't ever stopped to really say, God, what do you think in this situation? What do you want? And sometimes you just be like, whatever's good. Sometimes you will give us clarity on whether we should move forward, whether we should put the brakes on something. But let us inquire of you more. Because you really are a father to your kids. You want us to come to you. And we thank you so much for that. So today as we're here, again, I ask that you would bring those things that we're wrestling with to our thoughts, to our mind, and that we might inquire of you. That we might be great at following you as sons and daughters of the King. In Christ's name, amen.